So I'll just open up quickly with some housekeeping. So I want to say good afternoon to all of our members and partners. I'm Kerriann Coady, CEO for CHBA Vancouver Island, and we'd like to welcome you all to our Fireside Chat with the Honourable Erin O'Toole. When the floor is open for questions, please utilize the Q&A feature on your screen and we will pose the questions in the order they are submitted. It is my pleasure to introduce to you John Drazic, CHBA Vancouver Island President, and Mark Bernhardt, CHBA Vancouver Island Government Relations Chair, whom along with myself will be your moderators this afternoon. Please welcome John for his opening remarks.
Thanks, Kerriann. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation, and from where I'm calling from in the Neuse Bay, Snuneymuxw First Nation. For the residential construction sector, building community is something that we do every day. We build high quality new homes that meet the evolving needs of Canadians. We also construct important retrofits and renovations to improve the function, livability, accessibility, and efficiency of existing homes. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, something has become abundantly clear, is that our homes are more important than ever. Our homes have become our workplaces, our classrooms, and our gyms. Residential construction, both new construction and renovation, will provide much needed jobs and economic activity during the economic recovery of Canada. This is why the conversation we are having here today is extremely important. Before I introduce the Honourable Erin O'Toole, allow me to tell you a little bit about him. Mr. O'Toole has led a life of service. Born in Montreal, he grew up in the middle-class community of Beaumont, Ontario. He then enrolled in the Royal Canadian Air Force when he was 18, where he attended the Royal Military College of Canada. His time in the RCAF took him across Canada, completing basic training in Chilliwack, where I understand, and he can confirm this, where he spent some time in both Esquimalt and Comox on Vancouver Island. And he then earned his wing in Winnipeg and served out of Halifax, serving as a technical engineer. He participated in search and rescue missions on Sea King helicopters and learned French during that time. After 12 years of service, Erin retired from the military and spent the next decade working in the private sector as a corporate lawyer. He's a founding member of the board of directors for the True Patriot Love Foundation, a charity that serves veterans and military families across Canada. He served as parliamentary secretary to the Minister of International Trade before becoming Minister of Veteran Affairs. After serving as the Conservative Shadow Minister of Foreign Affairs for 2 years, Erin is now the leader of Canada's Conservatives. Please join me in welcoming the Honourable Erin O'Toole.
Thank you very much, John, Kerriann, and I look forward to this opportunity. I wish I could be in BC, but since I can't be, I'll tell you a little story of my first experience with your beautiful province. When I was 13, I took the train from Toronto to Vancouver with my grandfather to see Expo 86. And that's when I fell in love with British Columbia for the first time. 5 years later, as John said, I was back for boot camp in the military at Chilliwack. Little bit of a different experience, military boot camp compared to Expo 86. And then I did do some training at CFB Comox on magnificent Vancouver Island. And then as a member of Parliament and Cabinet Minister, I've been fortunate to get to know the people, the places, and the leaders across British Columbia. I wish I could be with you today, but I appreciate this virtual podium. You might have seen the new Conservative plan to secure the future. At least I hope you have. Very few people understand what it means to secure the well-being of Canadians better than the home builders industry. As you said, John, you build and foster community. You help secure that community for Canadian families so that they can live with less worries and provide long-term stability for their family and for their savings. But many people on Vancouver Island fear they'll never be able to afford a home. It's the same in the Lower Mainland. Young people especially see that dream of home ownership as increasingly out of reach. It's clear that housing affordability is greatly affected by Canada's relatively low supply. This problem has been compounded by COVID-19. Building more homes is one of the key long-term sustainable solutions to making housing more affordable to more Canadians. And we want to do everything possible to help you in that effort. Building new home creates a ripple effect for the local community, generating jobs and stimulating the economy. I strongly believe that home builders are critical to Canada's economic growth, particularly as we grow after COVID-19. And that's what I'd like to talk about for a moment. Our country coming out of COVID-19 is at a crossroads. And soon, Canadians will have to determine what path we want to take. The path of more of the same from the Trudeau Liberals and the other parties, more big deficits, more debt, more taxes, and less opportunity, or a more steady and certain path to securing our future, a path that will deliver us a Canada where those who've struggled the most through this pandemic can get back to work. This spring, I introduced Canada's Recovery Plan, a plan to secure that future. Canada's Conservatives will enact a comprehensive jobs plan to recover the 1 million jobs lost during the pandemic within 1 year. We'll work to rebuild the main streets across Vancouver Island and the rest of Canada by assisting small businesses and providing incentives to invest in, rebuild, and start new businesses, including construction and renovation firms. And we will help set the environment for more home building to help increase supply across the island, across British Columbia, and in other parts of this country. We're looking at ways to encourage and work with municipalities to reduce red tape, delays that can add so much to the price of a new home. We're looking at incentives for cities like Victoria to build housing where people live and commute. We will take steps to ensure housing remains accessible to Canadians. We can work together, the private sector and all levels of government, to make it attractive to invest in rental housing and have a real plan for housing cooperatives. These are some of the ideas we're working on, and I want to hear some of your ideas today. Recently, I was also very proud to release the Conservative Plan for the Environment and Climate Change. Home builders know, perhaps better than most industries, the need to adapt to the realities of climate change. Our plan will empower British Columbians and reduce emissions while preserving jobs and investment at a key time in our country's history. In particular, every time Canadians buy a hydrocarbon-based fuel under the plan we're proposing, they would pay into a low carbon savings account that they would manage and could use towards purchases that help lower their carbon footprint. That money saved could be put towards improvements to the home, from an efficient furnace to new windows. The decisions we collectively make in the next few years will define Canada for this generation and the next. And as a father of 2 young kids, my greatest worry is failing to leave a better Canada to them. It's what drives me every day, and I'm quite sure it's what drives you and your members. It's a motivating force for the Home Builders Association to build that brighter future for your workers and for their families and communities. And I want you to know, although I can't be there in person, that we will have your back to help work on issues the industry is facing on Vancouver Island and across British Columbia. We can and we must work together to make the dream of home ownership possible for more and more Canadians. The Conservative Plan and our recovery plan post-COVID will get the economy back on track to secure a brighter future for more Canadians. Thank you again for the opportunity, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much for those opening remarks. We really appreciate you being here today, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So let's get right into it then. In the Conservatives' plan, the jobs plan there, it says that we would like to secure a future that is committed and has every Canadian that deserves or deserving of a secure and dignified job that comes with a stable, well-paying income. And the Canada's Conservatives will enact a comprehensive jobs plan to get Canadians back to work across the country, creating opportunity in all sectors of the economy and the country. And I'd like to specifically ask about your thoughts on green jobs. This is something particularly close to me because I work in one of those green jobs and in part of the green economy. There's a huge opportunity here for growth, and particularly in construction. And so I'd like to know what sort of policies the Conservatives would use to boost skills training and availability of workers in this area. And that's something that we've recently struggled with. We've had a really hard time hiring people to fill those green jobs.
Well, that's a great question. And it is something I worked on in the private sector as well. Before becoming a parliamentarian, I worked on some environmental issues as a lawyer, and even helped host an environmental business luncheon series in Toronto to look at everything from renewable fuel standards to alternative sources of energy to lower carbon emission industries. And this is a growing area. So what we have to do is balance off a couple of things. The training money that the federal government spends is not being spent as effectively as it could be. We don't match it to gaps in the economy and to gaps in our productivity. That is what we need to do. The federal government often partners with the provinces and with colleges, universities on that training and retraining. But we need to focus it to driving new areas of growth in our economy. And we need to make sure the private sector is at the table, because the end of training and retraining, we want to make sure there is that job, that nobility of going through that retraining or reskilling to make sure you land an opportunity for you and your family. And that can match up to some of the growing areas, whether it's in green building, whether it's renewables, whether it's in some of the sustainable traditional industries in British Columbia. The forestry standards in Canada are amongst the most sustainable in the world. We also have to earmark our immigration system to be faster to fill those gaps as well. Because if we are able to make our economy more productive, it's not only good for that person that can get accelerated permanent residency and citizenship in Canada, it's an accelerator on our economy. Finally, our climate change plan that I announced had a number of measures, and it's a modeled plan, so we'll meet our Paris targets, but with vastly better GDP growth than the Liberal plan. In fact, we engaged a BC-based climate modeling firm to make sure that our plan was verified and tested. We also have substantive investments in small modular reactors, in carbon capture, utilization, sequestration, in hydrogen. All of these potential areas are exciting. We also are looking to set the standard based on BC's approach on electric vehicles and introduce a renewable standard to natural gas, allowing more renewable participation in our natural gas stream, which will be used not just at home, but internationally, leveraging the greening of our traditional industries as well. So there's a lot we're putting forward to Canadians, and I'm very excited to talk about it.
Perfect. Thank you. Our next question. There are three factors that determine affordability: jobs and income, mortgage rules, and house price. All three factors have been working against young Canadians in recent years. A thorough review of the existing mortgage system is needed. It needs to be done through a lens of fairness and access for first-time homebuyers before implementing any macroprudential or policy changes that could further disproportionately impact first-time homebuyers, including the mortgage stress test. Will the Conservative government consider implementing the changes to the stress test that were to have taken effect April 6, 2020, but were put on hold due to the pandemic, and as of June 1st will be increased?
Thanks. This is something we've been talking to people, Kerriann, across the country on for several years, and we've got to look at right now. We've got a bit of a dramatic rise in our real estate situation, 30% increase year over year in Canada. A number of reasons for that: low interest rates, liquidity in the system from the excessive government spending, a whole range of things. And we have to make sure that the market stabilizes and then set fair policies. Prior to this sudden rise, we saw a bit of an unfairness because there was central CMHC sort of mortgage stress rules based on a few markets in Canada, but not really being reflective of the whole country. We want to make sure that we're a partner. The federal government has a role to play here on everything from CMHC, the mortgage stress test, to the setting of mortgage parameters, right through to FinTrack and work on money laundering and other things. We can also partner with municipalities and provinces on infrastructure, spend, transit, other things. But as you know, probably better than any industry, municipal and provincial approvals and supply is key. So we're looking to be a partner at this, because the supply issue in British Columbia and in Ontario will be key for that first-time home buyer. I'm very proud that I have a BC MP, Brad Viss from Mission, as our first Conservative shadow minister for housing. And he's coming up with a platform that will address everything from affordable housing and issues at the margins, including homelessness, but also a package of policies that will help those new younger Canadians out of school still have the dream of home ownership. I think it is so critical to the well-being of families and communities.
Great, thank you, Erin. I've got a question for you on our natural resource sector. As we know, Canada is moving towards more renewable energies and cleaner energies, and indeed the world is. And we know this is creating a massive demand for natural resources, whether it's copper for transmission lines or lithium for EV batteries. And Canada is uniquely positioned to take advantage of this truly generational opportunity. The industries that this sector supports include well-paying jobs throughout the economy. And where we see this as having an impact for the home builders is on home affordability. People with good paying jobs throughout the country are more able to afford a home. And that's particularly the case here in BC. So my question for you is, does your party recognize this opportunity? And importantly, how would you position Canada to attract the massive amounts of investment capital that's going to be necessary to develop these resources and industries?
Thanks, John. Our party is the only party that recognizes this opportunity and knows that it's going to be fundamental to our economic recovery post-COVID. In fact, Mr. Trudeau, the NDP, the Green, there's this sort of group on the left that are against everything. They don't want capital and investment to come to Canada. And they don't seem to realize that whether it's, as I said, the most sustainable forestry practices in the world in British Columbia, the most engaged Indigenous partnerships, including partner and equity partnerships with First Nation communities, whether it's the Coast Salish or others that are benefiting as part of economic reconciliation. We have the highest and most transparent standards in the world with respect to our environmental regulation, rule of law, human rights. Every time there's less Canadian energy, less Canadian minerals or forestry products, that gap is filled with countries that either have atrocious records on all those things or diminished records than Canada. In business terms, the global financial markets and insurance markets are looking at environmental social governance, ESG. Canada is an ESG superpower. And then you add in the Indigenous partnerships we're building, I call it our ESGI+. We are leaders, and we have to start promoting that amongst the free world. As EVs are developed and we have an ambitious electric vehicle mandate in our own climate change plan, the rare earth minerals should be sourced from Canadian sources, not from communist Chinese resources, where none of the safeguards with respect to human rights and other things are met. So we not only understand that, John, we're going to fight for that. The other parties don't want any project to get done in Canada ever. And it's quite sad to see the NDP that used to suggest they fought for working families have abandoned the families of Kitimat, whether the new project, the LNG, or the aluminum smelter, which are aluminum 7 times cleaner than Chinese sourced aluminum. So I think we have to have an honest conversation with Canadians to let them know that post-COVID, we need to get every cylinder in our economic engine firing. And we need to be proud of what we build and what we do in Canada, whether it's the resources in the ground or the resources in our heads.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, we've had a lot of talk about house prices, across the country and everywhere else, and there's some different opinions coming out, from CMHC and other groups on what the house prices should be or what we should expect them to be. And so I wanted to know, from a conservative perspective, what is the hope for the cost of real estate? Is it that it goes up, or is it that it goes down? And how would that fit into your plan to get middle-class families into their first home?
Well, that's a great question, Mark. I worked in the private sector. I'm a sort of a free market person. And as you know, in real estate, the value of something is what someone will pay for it on a given day. And lately, that's been very high. In fact, my region in the Greater Toronto area, the year over year, the Durham region is up 34% in 1 year. I'm not sure that's sustainable. And when the Bank of Canada came out today, as you probably know, with about almost a quarter of new mortgages being at a 450% loan to income ratio, we're at long-term historic interest rates. We have to make sure that we watch our financial situation, because not only is housing so critical to the well-being of families, as you know, construction and the wider home building and commercial construction in most provinces represents the largest total employer. I know that's the case in Ontario. I'll take an educated guess that it's probably the same in British Columbia or very close to it. So we have to make sure that part of our economy stays strong, stays growing. And that's why I'm not going to suggest to you what is the perfect price. I have to make sure that we don't have Canadians at risk if interest rates suddenly go up. We need the supply issue to be addressed, because I think the more supply there is, there hasn't been the accumulation of supply to meet the spike in demand over the last year to 18 months. That spike is due to a whole range of things, from interest rates to government funds to people not traveling and more savings, to wanting to lock into rates and causing bidding wars. So I think we have to make sure that as we ramp up supply, we make sure there's more communities approving and tying development, more transit, opening up areas for people to have more housing options. Then we can address the longer term issues, everything from mortgage terms and amortizations right through to the stress test and other things, to make sure that we're not overextending. And your work is critical. So we need your industry to stay successful.
Wonderful. I guess this would expand a little bit more on that. So to address growing inequities in mortgage access that disproportionately impact younger first-time homebuyers trying to achieve the Canadian dream of previous generations, would the Conservative government, if elected, support the return of the option for 30-year amortizations to first-time homebuyers to offset some of the barriers to homeownership and disproportionate challenges to accessing the financial benefits?
Thank you, Kerriann. You can tell I'm having a lot of these conversations because some of the things I've talked about, you're raising. I'm really proud of our Shadow Minister, Brad Viss, the MP for Mission Masquee, Fraser Canyon on the Lower Mainland. He knows the GVR pressures. He's also one. We have the biggest caucus of millennial MPs. So he's a young dad. He's in his 30s. He knows his peer group in British Columbia is worried about accessing the housing market. So mortgage terms and amortization periods are one part of this scenario. Specific programs to access first-time home buyers, the Trudeau plan announced 2 budgets ago has been a complete failure. There's not been the take-up at all. So we can't have Ottawa knows best solutions that are totally disconnected from the needs on the ground. We also find that RSP, first-time programs and things like that, a lot of students coming out of school and getting past don't have those savings accumulated, but their parents do. So is there an ability to provide some flexibility there? We know from the studies, part of the rise in some bidding wars and other things are people getting assistance from family members. Can we come up with a policy that recognizes some of the realities on the ground, and can we incentivize in a positive way with municipalities and others that supply piece? You know, I've talked to the longest serving mayor, I think, in British Columbia, Stu Young, who you probably know from Langford. We had a great call a few weeks ago. I wish I could visit, but I can't. So we did it virtually. Their municipalities won awards for their transparency, their effectiveness in review. That needs to be the standard. so that we can actually, if there's capital on the sidelines, if your members want to add to that supply and are ready, let's not make it a cumbersome, delayed, uncertain process. Because we've even seen a program that if you bought your lumber last year or you waited to buy your lumber this year, gosh, that cost of the home goes out the window. So certainty and transparency has to be key for the approval process, and tying some federal money to incent that is what we're looking at as well. So Brad is going to be presenting a series of policies that I think will address all the issues that the federal government can to be a partner.
Great, thank you. Focusing a little bit more on bottlenecks our industry is seeing that's actually holding back getting projects built. This is, what we can say is that, proudly, is that we've got the membership and we've got the skills, we've got the ability to provide that affordable housing to meet demand. But what's standing in the way of getting these projects built or get going is it's around municipal governments, which unfortunately, there are exceptions, as you mentioned, in Langford. Many have a pretty dismal record with extremely long processing times, whether it's rezoning or simply getting a building permit or even a building inspection completed. This only exacerbates the supply issue. And it also, as you can imagine, it adds undue costs on the final product. So with demand already outstripping supply, and as we understand it, current trends, we're looking to be about 300,000 units short of supply over the next decade. So prices are going to reflect this supply and demand imbalance. So what efforts could be expected from the Conservative government to assist the building community with respect to development approval processes?
Thanks, John. You're right. This is a big concern that our team has highlighted, and as I'm sure you're familiar with the C.D. Howe report that shows that the development charges, fees, a range of structural delays can add, in some cases, $230,000 to the price of home development, depending on the jurisdiction. And that uncertainty and cost will sometimes factor into whether the development takes place or not. So I think that has to be eliminated and reduced as much as possible, because that is adding to the affordability crisis for that first-time entrant. It's slowing addressing the supply. And I've spoken to about 15 or 16 chambers in British Columbia, several mayors in the Tri-Cities, in the interior, across the island, because as a new leader, I want to hear from partners on the ground. I'm going to be a collaborative leader, not an Ottawa knows best, like Mr. Trudeau in the ivory tower in Ottawa. I want to see what are the unique needs. But if there are bottlenecks, as you described, can we incentivize closing down that bottlenecks by tying the federal fund to some performance objectives? This is something that the Trudeau government has done very, very poor job on. We've got a prime minister who's very good at announcements, very poor at follow through and measurement. And my background in the private sector and the military, you don't just talk about your plan, you have to execute it. So if we can put in some measurement and some performance outcomes and tie the federal funds to that, I think we can incentivize reducing that red tape and delay. I do know from talking to a lot of municipal leaders that is where they want to go. They know that this delay is leading to less supply, and they know their residents are worried about their children being able to live in the community they work or grew up in. So I'll be building partnerships, but I won't be scared to shoot for some accountability and performance.
That's excellent, and actually really ties well into our next question here in terms of measuring performance. And I want to take a minute to note for our members that maybe don't remember it that far back, but it was actually a Conservative government that committed to the Paris Agreement. And in there, it shows that all buildings should be net zero in the very near future. And that commitment shows up for us as builders in the national and the provincial energy codes, neither of which are currently on track to meet the Paris Agreement targets. And in particular, the National Building Code produces vast inequity between mansions and compact affordable housing. So, if you just want a affordable place to house granny in the backyard in a garden suite or something like that, you're going to be paying a disproportionately high amount in order to do that versus a sprawling mansion somewhere that would get essentially a free pass or close to it. And what I'd like to know is what can the Conservative government do, or the Conservative opposition at this time, maybe government in the near future, do to address this issue of inequity? And would a Conservative government include investment in R&D to get us back on track and address that inequity?
Yes, thanks, Mark. We would look to partner. As you know, the National Building Code, there's a number of areas that need to be addressed, and even some of the innovations in terms of wood construction at certain sizes and other things have not been looked at, and there can be some sustainable efforts with respect to that. And we've talked to people, we talk to first responders because they want some input on the building code. We need to make sure that there's a made in Canada approach to net zero. So it is time to modernize the building code and other things to make sure that everything we're doing is sustainable and uses Canadian products and materials as much as possible. So we're committed to that. This is an area where the government needs to partner with industry, with builders, and with the provinces, and of course, by extension, the municipalities. But we've already committed to taking a look at this as part of our approach towards net zero. This is another example that Mr. Trudeau has announced a net zero bill with very little detail. They've already put their own insiders on the committee before it even finished being debated in Ottawa. So I want all Canadians to be part of our efforts on climate change. That's why we're proposing a personal low carbon savings account to allow people to see what is their carbon footprint and make purchase decisions towards lowering it. That's why we have very many measures to partner on technological improvements. And I think on building and other things, there's already a lot of builders doing Energy Star and a whole range of industry standards. We need to make sure that the National Building Code and municipal approvals keep up to what industry is already doing, and then raise the standard based on that.
Wonderful, thanks. So our next question is on everybody's favorite topic, lumber. So the surging demand and limited supply of lumber is a significant issue. It's driving up prices in housing. With strong housing demand expected to continue and lumber supply struggling to keep up, it is expected lumber prices will stay high for some time. What efforts could we expect from a Conservative government?
Thanks, Kerriann. This is an area where I wish we'd had a Conservative government. We'd be in a much better position. And I'll tell you why. There's been about 7 mill closures in British Columbia in the last number of years alone, a lot of investment leaving or uncertain. When we had the opportunity to renegotiate the NAFTA agreement with the United States, I was the critic at the time to Minister Freeland and Mr. Trudeau's priorities to enter into those negotiations. Completely absent from that was a softwood lumber agreement. Our most consistent trade irritant with the United States going back 50 years is softwood lumber and the unfair treatment of Canadian crown-sourced lumber because of a few special lobbies in Washington. The only 2 governments in my lifetime that have negotiated strong and certain agreements have both been Conservative, Mulroney and Harper. And this is what I put forward as a priority for Canada in NAFTA. I said we needed to have a softwood lumber agreement. We needed to support auto and the steel and aluminum sectors for manufacturing, and then fight back on agricultural issues because the US have huge subsidies and they complain about us. We should have had a real negotiation. Instead, Mr. Trudeau talked about a lot of non-trade issues in those negotiations, from climate change to reconciliation, all of which are important issues, but they're never part of a trade issue where you're talking about tariffs, you're talking about timelines, you're talking about country of origin. It was a real missed opportunity, and that missed opportunity now under 3 different presidential administrations, Mr. Trudeau has failed on softwood lumber. In fact, the new trade representative for the United States just 2 days ago said Ottawa has not even advanced a softwood lumber agreement to her as a priority. The Trudeau government has failed that industry, failed British Columbia. We will not. This is a priority for me and something I will get done. I've done negotiations in the private sector. I've talked about making this a priority, and now the crisis in the US gives us a bit of a window to make our case again.
Great, thank you. I'm going to come back to housing costs. I think we've touched on this from a few different angles, so no surprise, it's a bit near and dear to us. So coming back to understanding that there's a significant portion of rising house costs are actually associated with things around the building code, whether it's around building higher performance homes, both that can mean both for structural purposes and also for environmental reasons. This is also, we see prices increasing, compounded by the development fees and taxes. You mentioned yourself the CD Howe report, and accounting for sometimes up to 25% of the cost of a new home. All these certainly have an impact on affordability. So coming back to you with the question of how the Conservative Party plans to address that housing affordability issue.
Yeah, thanks, John. As I said earlier, on some of these things, I'll be the first to tell you on the development charges. This is as live of an issue for the Durham Region home builders, the GTA home builders, as it is for your members. That is a municipal or a regional government issue, and we're willing to work with them. And as I said, incentivize to try and make approvals quicker and to make it more certain. Because when over $200,000 of the cost of a home is coming from charges and fees and a whole range of things, it is taking advantage a little bit of an industry and holding back supply. On the federal side, whether it's affordable housing or things where we can make direct investments, we're very clear to do that and very keen to do that. One area we would like to see accelerated is a modernized approach to cooperatives. I talked about that at the outset. An approach to bring in more partnerships as much as possible on affordable housing, from nonprofit organizations to faith-based organizations. I've met legions that build affordable housing extensions for veterans and things like this. The more capital we can bring in, the more certainty. If the federal government can do that by making it a requirement of our funding partnership, we will be there to do that. Anytime a federal policy can bring a multiplier effect to an area of policy, that makes it smarter. And that's why I'll be a very hands-on leader in this regard, because I'm not going to be just about the announcements like the current Prime Minister. It's about making sure you get the balance right, you build partnerships, and you measure the performance. Because if something's not working, you have to make the changes. And that's what I did when I was minister, and that's what we'll do in government.
Great, thank you. And as a follow-up question to that, does the Conservative Party see any value in the form of whether it's to the home builder or to a potential home buyer of providing rebates or tax incentives? That's something that we'd have to look at. Right now with the supply issue and the price, the rebates or the assist really needs to be to targeted first-time home buyers, these sorts of things. And on the other end of the spectrum, the affordability piece. I've asked my shadow minister to come up with 3 distinct pillars of policy groups, because housing is such a broad area, and it encompasses everything from people at risk in the margins and homelessness, and so that's something BC has long faced. And that transitional piece, it relates to the rise in the opioid crisis and a number of the things that have been made worse from the pandemic. Then you get into affordable housing and people that are not facing some of the same challenges, but you have to have a mix of options. And then there's the first-time home buyer piece, which is
a real issue that people have good jobs, they're out, but they're priced out of the markets they're in, or they haven't accumulated the savings to enter that market. We need policies that address all three things. And in Vancouver, for example, I've talked to some of the top innovation companies, and there's such a great hub of innovation in Vancouver, from Hootsuite to Abcelerate, exciting. And they say one of their biggest things is affordability, and people not being able to, they have the great work opportunity, not being able to live and enjoy that amazing lifestyle in a close enough way. So housing and transit have to be key parts of that. And so we're going to have policy that try and address all three aspects of the housing piece.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's feedback we've heard from a lot of our members, is that we have these great jobs here to give to people, but we just can't afford to have them live here, and that's great. And so you've talked a lot about working together and coming together for various different things here, and I wanted to see if we could dig a little bit deeper into that and ask, what would working together with the Home Build Association look like for the Conservatives, and how might that look going forward?
Well, let's address the supply issue. And I think, as I said, federal, we have direct role in some of it in terms of CMHC with respect to financial services and instruments, and then a whole range of tax policies that in some cases can work for first-time home buyers. We also have some funds for infrastructure and transit. So we have a big role to play, but this is an area where the driver's seat is, as you know, on the municipal level and the provinces as well. So anything we can do to help facilitate that, including dialogues on everything from the National Building Code to other things, I think we need to be a part of. I also think an exciting new part of the discussion has to be some First Nation development corporations and players from that space. I think there's a lot of really innovative Indigenous business leaders and communities, especially in the Lower Mainland and on Vancouver Island, that can be a real part of this solution as well, and have to be at the table really right at the beginning. So I think if the federal government, as well with that constitutional aspect, can help facilitate some of these discussions, we are going to be there, because housing is so critical to the well-being of families and communities that we will use that leadership role, but look to build partnerships.
Perfect, thank you. Our next question comes in from the Vancouver Island Real Estate Board. Are you aware of the white paper from the Canadian Real Estate Association, the Home Ownership Dividend for Canadians?
I am familiar with the white paper from the Canadian Real Estate Board, or CREA, the Real Estate Association, and it really reiterates what we've been talking about here, which is how core to the well-being of a community home ownership can be. Everything from schools, quality of life, education, crime, all these sorts of things that. And we agree. And I think all of us have discussed this on this call. And not only builders, real estate agents, mortgage brokers, all have a direct role and are looking for success in this area. And so we're going to, again, try and listen and try and work with all the associations to get the balance right on sustainable building, on supply, on first-time home buyers. And that's why these meetings are so important.
Great. How are we looking time-wise, Kerriann? Do we have time for more questions from our audience?
We are at 1 minute over at this point.
Okay, that answers that.
So we'll go to Mark for your next piece, for your closing.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I'd just like to thank you for coming to talk to us today, and see if you had any closing remarks before we all go.
Well, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity, Mark, and Kerriann, John, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss something so core, as I said, to our economic recovery, to the success of communities, and that is home ownership. And so please give my best to all of your members and their employees. I truly wish I could be on Vancouver Island. It's one of my favorite parts of this great country, and I look forward to getting back. We are going to get through this time. I'm an eternal optimist, so as much as I'm frustrated that we're a little slower than some countries on vaccine deployment, I think we can capture some of this summer and then work together to get this economy back on track. And that's why we've put out a recovery plan. That's why I put out the most comprehensive pre-election plan ever in Canadian history, our environmental plan. And I'm excited to talk about the team that the Conservatives are building across the country, including on Vancouver Island, where we've got some great candidates stepping forward. And as soon as I can do this in person, I will. But in the meantime, thank you for providing this podium for me today. Thanks for the discussion. And I look forward to sharing our housing policies ahead of the next election with you and hope to gain your support.
Excellent. Thank you again for your time. We really appreciate the opportunity and hope to continue this dialogue going forward. I'd like to thank everyone for submitting some questions in there. We'll do our best to get those answered and get back to you as well. And thanks again to the Honorable Erin O'Toole. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Be well.
See you later.
Thanks, everyone.